In this video, I'm going to show you 4 levels of logo animation in After Effects, starting from basic and moving all the way to expert. I'll also include the vector file in the description, so make sure to subscribe, like, and let's dive in. Press Ctrl+I to quickly import our vector file. Be sure to select Import as Composition to keep all the layers intact for easier animation. Next, double-click on the composition to open all the layers. Select the layer you want, press Enter, and rename it to keep things organized. Now, move the text layer further along the timeline to give us some space. Let's focus on animating the icon layer first. Press Y to activate the Pan Behind tool, then drag the anchor point to the center of the icon for better control during animation. Press S to open the scale properties and set a keyframe. Move this keyframe ahead, then bring the timeline indicator back to the beginning. Adjust the scale value to 0, and a start position keyframe will be created automatically. Next, move the text layer in the timeline so it aligns with the last keyframe of the icon layer. Press Y again to adjust the anchor point for the text layer. Then, press S to open the scale properties and repeat the scaling process. But this time, set the start position to 150 instead of 0. Now, press T to bring up the opacity properties and add a keyframe. Press U to reveal all keyframes. Then move the opacity keyframe further along the timeline. Add another keyframe and adjust the opacity to 0 for a fade-in effect. Let's preview the animation and see how it looks. Let's open the file as a composition once more and double-click to access the layers. Now click on the continuously rasterized star icon to maintain the quality of your layers. Continue adjusting the anchor points and renaming the layers as needed. With everything organized, we're ready to dive into our animation process. Now, select all the letter layers, press S to access the scale properties, and set a keyframe to mark the ending position in the timeline. Then, move the timeline indicator to the middle and adjust the scale value to 110. Next, bring the timeline indicator back to the beginning and set the scale value to 0. Select all the keyframes and press F9 to ease them for smoother animation. Finally, offset the layers for a staggered effect. Let's preview it and see how it looks. Next, bring the icon layer to align with the last keyframe of the last letter layer. This will ensure a cohesive flow in your animation. Now press P to access the position properties of the icon layer. Set an ending position keyframe for the icon layer. Then bring the timeline indicator back to the beginning. Adjust the position of the icon by dragging it slightly down. Once that's done, ease the keyframes for smoother movement. Now, add another keyframe in the middle and drag the icon back up. Let's preview and see how it looks. It looks a bit off, so let's adjust the timing for the appearance of the logo elements. Bring the icon to the beginning and move the letter layers further along the timeline. Next, press T to access the opacity properties and adjust the 2 keyframes from 0 to 100. Let's check how it looks now. If you're still not satisfied with the timing, select the position keyframes and hold down the Alt key while dragging them to adjust their timing. This gives you more control over the animation's flow. Open the vector file in After Effects and select all the layers. Right-click and choose Create Shapes from Vector Layer. Once that's done, clean up any unnecessary layers to keep your project organized. We're ready to start. Now, select the letter layers and move them further down the timeline as we'll need them later. Also, move the icon layer further to create space for the anticipation animation before the reveal. Press G or select the pen tool, then adjust the stroke thickness to 1. This will help ensure our lines are crisp and clean for the animation. Start drawing a stroke just above the icon to match its shape. Once you have your stroke, press Y and bring the anchor point to the top. Next, adjust the stroke thickness from 1 to 2 for more visibility. Now press Ctrl+Shift+D to cut the layer, and we're ready to animate this stroke. Open the stroke layer's properties and click the play icon to add a trim paths effect. Add the end keyframe and move it further along. Then move the timeline indicator to the beginning and set the value to 0 for the starting keyframe. Next, let's add a start keyframe for the trim paths. Then move the indicator to the end of the layer and adjust the value to 0. Now, press F9 to ease the keyframes. Select the end keyframes and open the graph editor. Adjust the graph for a faster start and a smoother finish. Do the same for the start keyframes, creating a slower start with acceleration toward the end. Let's take a look at what we have. Now we need a similar stroke for the bottom part of the icon. Press Ctrl+D to duplicate the layer. Move it along the timeline so it's visible and aligns with the icon. Drag it to the bottom. Then, press R to access the rotation properties and adjust the rotation accordingly to match the angle of the icon. Press G for the pen tool and adjust the stroke to match the shape of our icon. Once you're satisfied with the adjustments, move the layer to the beginning of the timeline to complete the anticipation scene. The next step is revealing the logo elements. Right-click on the icon layer and select the Offset Paths effect to create a reveal. First, adjust the amount to 1 to eliminate the stroke from our shape. Next, add a keyframe and move it along the timeline to set ending position for the reveal. Now, let's focus on the starting position. Adjust the amount until the shape disappears completely. This will create a clean start for the animation. Once you've set your keyframes, don't forget to ease them for smoother motion. Finally, let's head into the graph editor to tweak the animation curve for a more polished reveal effect. All right, let's preview what we have so far. Let's adjust the timing a bit for a better result by moving the layer closer to our anticipation animation. The next step is to scale the animated icon, and for that, we need to create a null object. Match the null object layer with the icon in the timeline, then parent the icon to the null object. This will allow us to control the scaling of the icon more easily. Now click on the null object and press S to access the scale properties. Create 2 keyframes to scale down the icon from 120 to 100. Ease the keyframes for smoother motion and adjust the graph editor accordingly. Let's preview how it looks. Nothing happened, so it looks like we need to work on the timing. Timing is crucial in animation, and this process improves significantly with practice. As you gain experience, you'll develop a sense of the right timing even before placing your keyframes. Take a moment to adjust the position of your keyframes in the timeline. Moving them closer together or further apart can dramatically change the flow and feel of the animation. Now it's time to animate the text. The easiest way to do this is to select all the text layers and set a position keyframe for the ending position. This gives you a solid foundation for your animation. Once you've done that, set the keyframes accordingly to achieve the start, overshoot, and end animation. Think of how you want the text to enter the scene. Should it bounce in with a bit of flair or smoothly glide into place? Now, let's take a look at how it all comes together. Let's enhance the text animation by making the layers appear randomly for a more dynamic effect. Offset the layers in the timeline so they don't all come in at once. This adds visual interest and keeps your audience engaged. Additionally, take a moment to adjust the overall timing to ensure each element flows smoothly into the scene. With these adjustments, our pro-level logo animation is ready. For the expert level, let's dive into Adobe Illustrator to break down the logo in more detail. Start by pressing Ctrl+Y to enter outline mode, then press P for the pen tool. Connect the points to create new shapes from the existing elements. Next, press Shift+M to activate the Shape Builder tool, and simply click on the areas you want to merge into new shapes. Once you're done, return to normal mode by pressing Ctrl+Y. Ungroup the elements. Then press V to select the new shape. Press Ctrl+X to cut it. Create a new layer and paste the shape in place by pressing Ctrl+Shift+V. separate the rest of the shapes into individual layers. Now we have a more flexible file to work with in After Effects. Just like we did in the previous levels, let's move the text layers further along the timeline to make space for the icon animation. Let's also move the icon layers forward in the timeline, just like the text layers. To keep things organized, make all layers invisible, except for the one we're going to start animating. This will help us focus on animating one element at a time, without distractions. If you've watched my other videos, you might already know this technique. Start by choosing the pen tool by pressing G and begin drawing over the element you want to animate. Increase the stroke level and make sure it fully overlaps the shape. Next, add a trim paths effect to the stroke. Place a keyframe and move it further along the timeline. Then put another keyframe at the beginning and set the value to 0. Ease the keyframes for smoother animation and adjust the graph editor for better control. Now, from the matte options, choose the stroke we just animated, and it will apply directly to our element. Once that's done, pre-compose the layers and click the star icon to maintain quality. Repeat this process for the other elements, and let's see what we've got. It feels a bit too fast, so let's adjust the keyframe timing. Double-click on the pre-composed layer to open it, press U to reveal the keyframes, and move the last keyframe further down the timeline to slow it down. Do the same for the other layers, and now the animation should look smoother and more balanced. Now, to make everything appear more randomly, we need to offset the pre-composed layers in the timeline. This will stagger their appearance for a more dynamic effect. Next, let's adjust the scaling to add even more variation to the animation. Create a null object and parent all the pre-composed layers to it. This will allow us to control the scaling and any other transformations uniformly across all layers. Press S to open the scale properties on the null object and add an ending position keyframe. Move the timeline indicator to the beginning and adjust the scale to 120. Copy this keyframe and paste it just before the ending keyframe to create a scaling effect. Finally, ease these keyframes and adjust the graph editor for a smoother transition. Now, let's add small details to make our logo reveal more appealing. Use the pen tool to draw tiny lines around the icon, creating subtle accents that will enhance the overall animation. Now add a trim paths effect to the lines you just drew and set keyframes for the end, start, and offset properties. Ease the keyframes and review each step to ensure a smooth result. We need to add the same start and end keyframes to the trim paths and offset properties to create a cohesive effect. Make sure to set the timing for these keyframes carefully to enhance the overall animation. Once you're happy with it, copy the trim paths effect. Select all the stroke layers and search for their content properties. Select the content, move the timeline indicator to the beginning, and press Ctrl+V to paste the effect on each layer. Finally, move the layers further down the timeline so they appear when the logo reveals. Let's see what we've got. Now, the last thing we need to do is add position animation for the pre-composed layers. Start by selecting all the pre-composed layers and pressing P to bring up their position properties. Set a keyframe for the ending position, which will determine where each layer will settle. Next, adjust the starting position for each layer, so they come together from a distance, creating a dynamic entry effect. This approach adds depth to the animation and keeps your audience engaged. Once you've set the start positions, ease the keyframes for smoother motion. Don't forget to adjust the graph editor for a slower start, allowing the layers to ease into the movement, followed by acceleration towards the middle, and finally, a deceleration as they come to rest at the end position. Finding the right timing is crucial, so take your time to tweak it until it feels just right. Once you're satisfied with the timing and movement of the layers, we can move on to animating the text. The text animation technique is similar to what we did earlier in this video, but this time we'll have the text come in from the top and move down into place. It's essential to adjust the positioning accordingly to achieve that smooth, downward motion. To give the text a more dynamic bounce effect, I use the Motion Tool extension's Elastic Control. It is free to use, and I will include a link in the description. Now that everything is set up, let's check the final result. That's it for today. Please subscribe if you enjoyed the content, and I'll see you in the next one.